Abandoned in the dark. The battlefield was silent now. Smoke rose from the charred remains of war machines, and broken bodies lay scattered under the blood-red sky. Kathera, a warrior of the Zorath Empire, lay among the dead, her breathing weak, her body battered. The pain was unbearable, but worse than that, she was alone. Her people had left her behind. She remembered the last moments before everything went dark. The battle had raged on, her squad pushing forward, cutting through enemy forces. Then, the explosion, fire, metal, and pain. She had fallen, her armor shattered, her body unable to move. She called for help, but her commander, General Xaltor, had only looked at her with cold eyes. Survival is for the strong. The weak do not belong in the Zorath Empire. And then they had left. Kathera lay in the ruins, her vision fading in and out. Her species was known for their strength, their resilience, but even she knew her body was failing. Her second heart struggled to keep her alive. Her third arm was completely crushed. Blood seeped from deep wounds, and the air was growing colder. She clenched her teeth. Was this how she would die? Abandoned, forgotten. A distant sound broke the silence. Footsteps. Her remaining functional arm reached for her blade, but she was too weak to lift it. The footsteps grew closer. Someone was coming. A shadow appeared, stepping over the wreckage, moving toward her carefully. A human. Kathera narrowed her eyes. Humans were not allies of the Zorath. They were weak, fragile, and soft-hearted. Yet this one did not look like a soldier. His armor was minimal, more like that of an engineer or a scavenger. His dark hair was messy, and his face was covered in dirt and sweat. He stopped a few feet away, looking at her with hesitation. "Still breathing?" he asked. Kathera tried to growl, but it came out as a weak cough. "Leave me." The human didn't move. He glanced around, as if checking for danger, then stepped closer. "You look like hell." She forced herself to glare at him. "Go away, human." He didn't listen. Instead, he crouched down, inspecting her injuries. "Damn, they'd really left you for dead, huh?" Kathera felt rage boil inside her, but she had no energy to express it. The human shook his head and muttered, "You're not gonna make it if you stay here. And I don't leave people behind." His words hit her harder than she expected. Her own kind had left her without a second thought. Yet this human, a stranger, was refusing to walk away. He reached out carefully, checking her wounds. She hissed in pain, but he didn't flinch. "I've got a bunker not far from here. It's not much, but it's better than dying in the dirt." Kathera didn't trust him. She didn't trust anyone, but the cold was creeping into her bones, and she knew she wouldn't last much longer. "Fine," she whispered, hating the weakness in her voice. The human nodded. Without hesitation, he lifted her. She was heavier than he expected, but he adjusted quickly. "Dan, you weigh a ton," he muttered, but he kept moving. Kathera's vision blurred as exhaustion took over. She wanted to fight, to resist, but her body wouldn't allow it. As she drifted into unconsciousness, she had one final thought. If this human tried anything, she would make sure he regretted it. As James carried her through the ruins, the shadows behind them shifted. Something was watching. The battlefield was not as empty as it seemed. Hunted in the shadows, Kathera woke to the sound of something breathing. Not her own breath. Something else. Her instincts screamed danger. She tried to move, but pain locked her muscles in place. Her second heart pounded, forcing sluggish blood through her veins. Her vision adjusted to the dim surroundings. A cramped metal structure, low flickering lights, walls coated in rust. Then she saw him. The human. He was crouched a few feet away, rifle raised, eyes locked on the dark entrance of what looked like an underground bunker. His jaw was clenched, his posture tense. Something was outside. Kathera barely remembered how she got here. The last thing she recalled was the human, James, carrying her through the battlefield, defying all logic, dragging her to safety despite her protests. Now he was standing guard over her like she was some fragile creature. Pathetic. She shifted, forcing herself upright, despite the sharp pain shooting through her ribs. The movement was too loud. James spun around, pressing a finger to his lips. "Shay," he whispered. Cathera narrowed her eyes. Cha. She was a Zorath warrior. She did not take orders from humans. Then she heard it. A low, guttural growl. Something big was outside. James exhaled slowly, adjusting his grip on the rifle. "Woke up just in time," he muttered. "Stay quiet, or we're both dead." Cathera bristled at the command, but held her tongue. She forced herself to focus, ignoring the pain clouding her mind. She knew that growl. Exareth hunters. Biomechanical predators designed for one thing: tracking and eliminating survivors. They didn't care about sides. They didn't care if you were Zorath or human. If you were injured and breathing, you were prey. James must have seen the change in her expression. "You know what that thing is?" he whispered. Cathera met his gaze. "Yes," she rasped, "and we will not survive if we stay here." The moment the words left her mouth, the metal door shuddered. A heavy impact, followed by the screech of claws scraping against steel. James cursed under his breath. That's not good. No, it was very bad. The Exareth hunter had found them. Escaping death. James scanned the room quickly, eyes darting between Cathera and the shaking door. "Can you move?" Cathera grit her teeth. "I will not die lying down." James muttered something about stubborn aliens, but didn't argue. He helped her up, wincing as she leaned heavily on him. Another slam. The door buckled inward. "We need an exit," James said. Cathera's sharp eyes scanned the dim space. Bunkers like these always had maintenance tunnels, small escape routes for emergencies. There. She pointed to a rusted hatch half buried under debris. James wasted no time, shoving metal scraps aside. "Locked," he hissed. "Figures." Cathera clenched her jaw. If she was at full strength, she could rip the hatch open with ease. But she wasn't, and they didn't have time. The door tore open. A nightmarish shape crawled through the opening. The Exareth hunter was twice the size of a man, its skeletal frame wrapped in black, chitinous armor. Its elongated skull had no eyes, only a wide, gaping maw filled with jagged metal teeth. A sickly green glow pulsed through the cracks in its body. It sniffed the air. It smelled blood. James didn't hesitate. He fired. The first shot slammed into the creature's chest, a direct hit. The bullet flattened uselessly against its armor. The hunter turned its head slowly, as if acknowledging him for the first time. Then it lunged. James barely dove out of the way as the creature's claws ripped through the air. Cathera forced her battered body to move, grabbing a metal pipe from the wreckage. Weak as she was, she would not die without a fight. "James," she barked, "shoot the joints." To his credit, he didn't question her. His next shot aimed for the hunter's elbow joint, the only exposed flesh between the armor plating. Boom. The bullet tore through, and the hunter screeched, collapsing to one knee. Cathera saw her chance. With a warrior's snarl, she launched herself forward, bringing the metal pipe down on the creature's skull with all the strength she had left. The impact sent a shockwave through her bones. The hunter twitched. Then it fell still. For a moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was their ragged breathing. James exhaled slowly. "Okay, that sucked." Cathera tossed the dented pipe aside. "We must move. More will come." James looked at the still smoking hole in the door. "Yeah, I figured." Together, they pried open the escape hatch and disappeared into the tunnels below. The impossible alliance. Cathera was running out of patience. The tunnels were cramped, damp, and filled with the stench of decay. It had been hours since they escaped the Exareth hunter, but every fiber of her being told her they were still being tracked. And yet, the human, James Carter, walked with an irritating sense of ease, as if he wasn't aware of the danger surrounding them. She clenched her jaw. Humans were reckless, irrational, suicidally stubborn. And yet, she was alive because of this one. She hated that fact more than anything. James tapped on a rusted metal sign hanging from the tunnel wall. This place used to be a maintenance network. If we're lucky, it'll lead us close to the supply cache you mentioned. Cathera exhaled sharply. Luck is not a strategy. James glanced back at her, smirking. It is when you don't have a better plan. She almost growled at him. If she weren't bleeding internally and still regaining her strength, she would have left him behind already. He was a civilian, not a warrior. No combat experience, no discipline, and a ridiculous sense of humor for someone constantly near death. Yet, despite his many flaws, he had saved her. And worse, he kept doing it. The thought unsettled her. The Zoreth Empire valued strength above all. No one saved the weak. No one rescued the fallen. But James had. That made him dangerous, because it made her question things she shouldn't. An unlikely plan. They finally reached a large junction, where several tunnels met in a wide chamber. Rusted pipes lined the walls, and a broken console flickered weakly. James pulled out a crude map he had stitched together from scavenged data. He knelt down, running a hand through his messy hair. All right, if I got this right, the supply case should be about 2 clicks west of here. Cathera folded her arms, unimpressed. And how do you plan to get past the patrols? James shrugged. Same way we got past the hunter. She narrowed her eyes. We nearly died. Yeah, but we didn't. He grinned. Which means we're due for some good luck. Cathera exhaled, resisting the urge to throttle him. Your optimism is foolish. James slung his rifle over his shoulder. Your pessimism is depressing. She bristled. I am not pessimistic. I am realistic. James chuckled. Realistically, we're both screwed, so we might as well keep moving. Cathera had fought alongside warriors her entire life. Brutal, disciplined, unyielding warriors. She had never met someone like him. And that terrified her more than anything. The enemy of my enemy. As they made their way through the tunnels, Cathera's acute senses picked up something. A faint vibration. A shift in the air. She stopped abruptly, raising a fist. James halted. What? Cathera's eyes darkened. Something is coming. They barely had time to react before a figure dropped from the shadows above. Cathera spun, her blade ready, then hesitated. It wasn't a Xerath hunter. It was a Zoreth soldier. But not just any soldier. Commander Vexer. Cathera's breath caught in her throat. Vexer had been part of her unit, one of the most feared warriors in the Zoreth Empire. The last time Cathera saw her, she had been leading the retreat, leaving Cathera to die alone. Now she stood before her, eyes cold, weapon drawn. Cathera, Vexer's voice was flat. You should not be alive. Cathera tightened her grip on her blade. Neither should you. Vexer's gaze flickered to James. And yet you are traveling with a human. Her lip curled in disgust. Pathetic. James held up his hands. Hey, nice to meet you too. Vexer ignored him. She took a slow step forward. Your survival is an insult to the Empire. You should have died in battle. Instead, you crawl through the shadows, hiding behind this weak creature. Cathera felt something dark stir inside her. Her people had abandoned her. And yet, here they were, still judging her. You left me, she growled. I was loyal to the Empire. I fought beside you. And when I fell, you walked away. Vexer tilted her head. Yes. No hesitation. No regret. James tensed beside Cathera, his fingers twitching near his rifle. He didn't understand their world, their brutal philosophy. But Cathera did. This was what she had been raised to believe. Strength. Survival. No mercy. So why now did it feel so wrong? A choice that cannot be undone. Vexer sighed. The Empire does not tolerate weakness, Cathera. You should understand this better than anyone. Cathera had understood it, for years. But then a human had lifted her from the dirt. Then a human had fought for her when no one else would. And now, standing before Vexer, she realized the truth. It wasn't the Empire that had made her strong. It was James. She glanced at him. He met her gaze without hesitation. No judgment, no disgust, just trust. Vexer sighed. You know what must happen now. Cathera's grip tightened on her blade. Yes. A long silence stretched between them. Then Cathera turned her back on Vexer. James blinked. Is that a good idea? Cathera took a deep breath. If she believes in the Empire's code, she will strike. Vexer did not move. James frowned. Okay, but what if she? Vexer sheathed her weapon. Cathera turned to face her again. The commander's expression was unreadable. Then she spoke. There is no place for you in the Empire anymore, Cathera. Cathera exhaled. I know. Vexer hesitated for the first time. Then I suggest you run. She turned, disappearing into the darkness of the tunnels. Cathera stood still, heart pounding. James cleared his throat. Sue, are we just ignoring how weird that was? Cathera exhaled, shaking her head. We need to reach the supply cache. Fast. James sighed. Right. No time for deep emotional reflection. Let's move. As they vanished into the tunnels, Cathera couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. She had made her choice. Now she had to survive it. Betrayed and hunted. Cathera's breath came slow and controlled. Her muscles coiled. Ready. The supply cache was just ahead. An abandoned Zoreth outpost buried under the ruins. Getting here had been a nightmare, but the real fight was about to begin. James crouched beside her, gripping his rifle tightly. So let me get this straight. This place is supposed to have everything we need. Cathera didn't look at him. Her gaze remained locked on the motionless corpses littering the entrance. Zoreth bodies, twisted and broken. Something had gotten here first. This was a cleanup operation, she muttered, scanning the bodies. They executed them. James frowned. Their own people. Cathera's jaw tightened. They were injured. The Empire does not tolerate weakness. James exhaled slowly. Your people suck. She didn't argue. Because for the first time, she agreed. Walking into the trap, they entered cautiously. The air was thick with the scent of plasma burns and death. The dim emergency lights flickered overhead, casting long, eerie shadows. Cathera took the lead, moving soundlessly, scanning every corner. Something felt wrong. James followed, quieter than she expected. For someone so loud and reckless, he had learned to move with surprising precision. They made it to the main chamber. The supply cache was still intact. Crates of power cells, weapons, rations, and medkits lined the walls. Everything they needed to escape this cursed place. James grinned. For once, something actually went right. Cathera's gut twisted. No, it was too easy. She turned, just as the first shot rang out. The commander's judgment. A plasma bolt barely missed her head, scorching the metal behind her. Cathera dove for cover as Zoreth soldiers stepped from the shadows, weapons raised. James cursed, scrambling behind a crate. Oh great, more people trying to kill us. I was starting to feel lonely. Cathera clenched her teeth. She recognized the insignia on their armor. The elite enforcers. And leading them, Commander Xaltor. Her former superior, the one who had left her for dead. His golden armor gleamed under the flickering lights. His cold, reptilian gaze locked onto her. Cathera. She rose slowly, keeping her hands near her weapons. Commander. His expression didn't change. I had hoped you would die with honor. Instead, I find you hiding with a human. His voice was dripping with disgust. You shame yourself and the Empire. James, ever the diplomat, peeked out from cover and muttered, Is it just me, Or do all your people have a stick up there? Cathera cut him off with a sharp look. Zaltor raised a hand, signaling his soldiers to hold fire. I will grant you one chance to redeem yourself, he said. Kill the human, and I will allow you to return. James blinked. Wow. Rude. Cathera felt her blood turn to ice. Kill James. The only one who had stood by her, who had saved her, fought beside her, refused to abandon her when everyone else had. She stared at Zaltor, at the soldiers who looked at her as if she were nothing. For years, she had fought for their approval, their respect. Now she saw the truth. They would never accept her, not because she was weak, but because she was stronger than they were, because she had learned something they never would. Honor wasn't about obedience, it was about choice. And she had already made hers. Burning bridges. Cathera moved in a blur. In one swift motion, she drew her plasma blade, slashed the nearest soldier's rifle in half, and kicked him back into his squadmates. Chaos erupted. James immediately started shooting, ducking behind cover as plasma bolts flew past him. I'm assuming this means you're not killing me, he shouted over the noise. Cathera snarled, deflecting a shot with her blade. Be silent and fight. Gladly. Zaltor roared in fury, activating his gauntlet. A crackling energy spear formed in his grip. You were a warrior once, Cathera, he spat. Now, you're nothing but a traitor. She faced him head-on, blade humming in her hand. I am not the one who abandoned my own. Zaltor lunged. Their blades clashed with a deafening crack, sending a shockwave through the chamber. Sparks flew as they exchanged brutal, lightning-fast strikes. Cathera was faster, stronger, and for the first time in her life, she was free. The final blow. Zaltor aimed a killing strike at her chest. Cathera sidestepped, twisted, and drove her blade through his armor. He froze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. His golden eyes flickered in shock, realization dawning. Then he collapsed. The remaining soldiers hesitated. James took the chance. He fired a shot into a fuel tank nearby. The explosion ripped through the outpost, sending a shockwave through the tunnels. Cathera barely had time to react as James grabbed her wrist and ran. The chase begins. They raced through the collapsing tunnels, smoke and fire at their backs. James, panting, yelled, "Did we just blow up your boss?" Cathera kept running. He was no longer my concern. James gave a breathless laugh. I swear, you get cooler every minute. She ignored the strange warmth in her chest. Less talking, more running. Behind them, alarms blared. The surviving soldiers would be after them soon. Cathera didn't care. She had chosen her path. Now she just had to survive it. As they disappeared into the tunnels, Cathera knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back. The final stand. The universe held its breath. Cathera and James stood at the edge of the ruins, staring at the distant silhouette of their only way out, a damaged escape shuttle, half buried in the wreckage of a fallen warship. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't safe. But it was their only chance. James adjusted the strap on his rifle, exhaling slowly. Tell me the thing flies. Cathera's gaze flicked toward him. It has engines. James gave her a dry look. That's not an answer. She didn't have one. Because it didn't matter. They weren't getting to that shuttle without a fight. The hunters closed in behind them. The ruins shook with approaching footsteps. The Zorith forces were coming fast, and they weren't alone. Cathera could hear them in the distance. Azora. Hunters. The Empire had unleashed them. Not just to kill her, but to erase any trace of her existence. James scowled. They really don't take betrayal lightly, huh? Cathera's grip tightened around her blade. No. James cracked his neck. All right, well, if we die, I just want to say, this has been the weirdest and most exciting week of my life. Cathera didn't look at him. We are not dying. James grinned. Loved the confidence. But she wasn't confident. She was ready. Because there was no running now. They had to stand and fight. Holding the line. The first wave of enemies emerged from the smoke. Zorath soldiers, armed and relentless, moving in perfect formation. Behind them, the Exareth hunters, their skeletal frames crawling over wreckage, their metallic jaws clicking in anticipation. James muttered, "I hate those things." Cathera didn't answer. She was already moving. Her blade ignited, a crackling violet edge slicing through the air. She sprinted forward, colliding with the first line of soldiers like a storm. The battle erupted. James took cover behind a rusted vehicle, firing controlled bursts, dropping soldiers with pinpoint shots. His aim was flawless. He didn't waste bullets, didn't hesitate. Cathera moved like a phantom, her blade carving through armor and flesh. The soldiers hesitated. She was supposed to be dead. She showed them how wrong they were. A hunter lunged at her. She twisted midair, slashing its throat before it could land. Another charged James, its claws outstretched. James whirled, pulled a grenade from his belt, and shoved it into the creature's open maw. "Chew on that." Boom. The hunter exploded from the inside. Cathera barely registered the chaos. She was in a rhythm now, her blade an extension of her body. But they kept coming. For every enemy they cut down, more took their place. James ducked beside her, breath ragged. "We're running out of time." Cathera spun, slicing through another attacker, then nodded toward the shuttle. "We need to move. Now." James grinned. "Thought you'd never say it." The final push. They ran. Through the chaos, through the burning wreckage, dodging plasma fire as the enemy closed in from all sides. James was fast, but Cathera was faster. She cut a path through the soldiers, leading him forward, her mind locked onto one goal: reaching the ship. They were meters away when a plasma blast struck Cathera in the back. She stumbled, her vision flashing white. James grabbed her before she could fall, dragging her toward the shuttle. "Nope, not today. We are leaving." She tried to regain her footing, but her body wasn't responding. Then she heard the footsteps. Zaltor, still alive, still hunting her. He stepped through the smoke, his armor scorched, his weapon raised. "You cannot run from the Empire, Cathera." She gritted her teeth, forcing herself up. "I am not running." Zaltor tilted his head. "Then you will die." James fired first. Zaltor dodged, too fast. He closed the distance in a blink, slamming James into the ground. Cathera's vision narrowed to a single point. She charged. Zaltor turned to strike her, but he was too slow. Cathera drove her blade into his chest. His golden eyes widened. She held his gaze as the light in them faded. Then she pulled her blade free. Zaltor fell. It was over. James groaned from the ground. "Ugh. Okay. That sucked." Cathera offered him a hand. He took it. "No time to celebrate," she said. "Get in the shuttle. Escape or die." James scrambled into the cockpit, flipping every switch he could find. The ship groaned, coughed, then roared to life. Outside, the remaining forces regrouped, preparing for a final attack. Cathera watched them, then turned to the shuttle's gun controls. James saw her expression. "Oh no." She smiled. For the first time, it wasn't bitter. Then she fired. The shuttle's cannons erupted, tearing through the remaining soldiers as the ship lifted off the ground. James whooped, gripping the controls. "We're flying. We're actually flying." Cathera exhaled, slumping into the co-pilot's seat. Finally. Behind them, the battlefield shrunk into the distance. They were free. As the stars stretched before them, James glanced at Cathera. "So, where to now?" She stared into the void. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. And that felt like freedom, escape, and a new purpose. The cockpit smelled like smoke and adrenaline. James gripped the controls, sweat dripping down his temple as the ship rattled violently. The engines sputtered, barely holding together as they tore through the planet's toxic atmosphere. Cathera sat beside him, still clutching her side where she'd been burned by plasma fire. She ignored the pain, her eyes locked on the display screen. They had minutes before pursuit arrived. James yanked a lever. "All right, tell me something good." Cathera's fingers flew over the navigation panel, scanning for a safe jump point. "The ship's thrusters are compromised. We have one shot at a hyperspace jump before the core overheats." James winced. "I really hate one-shot plans." Cathera didn't look at him. "Then survive, and you won't need another." He let out a breathless laugh, adjusting the ship's trajectory. "You know, that was almost encouraging." She ignored him. The Zorith fleet would be coming. If they didn't jump now, they were dead. The fleet arrives. A shrill alarm blared through the ship. Cathera's stomach sank. Incoming vessels detected. James glanced at the scanner. "Oh, that's not good." Cathera didn't need to see the screen. She already knew. The Zorith Empire had arrived. A full battalion of warships burst from hyperspace, surrounding the planet like a pack of wolves. James let out a strangled laugh. "They sent a damned fleet after us." Cathera exhaled. "They cannot allow a traitor to live." James's hands tightened on the controls. "Well, I'm kinda attached to living." Cathera's voice was calm. "Then fly." A desperate escape. The first shots came in hot. Plasma torpedoes streaking through space, locking onto their failing shuttle. James jerked the controls, dodging wildly. "Gonna be honest, this thing flies like a drunk asteroid." Cathera's hands moved instinctively, overriding safety protocols, rerouting power to shields. The ship shuddered violently as a blast grazed their left wing, sending them into a spiral. James cursed, wrestling with the controls. A hyperspace drive wasn't charged yet. They needed 40 more seconds, but they wouldn't last that long. James gritted his teeth. "Ideas? Because I'm fresh out." Cathera's mind raced. "Then, the debris field," she said suddenly. James blinked. "The what now?" She pointed to the screen, a floating graveyard of destroyed ships, leftover wreckage from an ancient battle. It was dense, unpredictable, a death trap. James stared. "Oh, that's stupid." Cathera nodded once. "Yes." He grinned. "I love it." Threading the needle, James punched the throttle, sending them hurtling into the debris field at breakneck speed. Behind them, the Zorith fleet hesitated. The wreckage was too unstable. One wrong move, and they'd collide with centuries-old warships still brimming with unexploded ordnance. Cathera and James had no such hesitation. They wove through the debris like ghosts, skimming past shattered hulls and broken fighters. Plasma blasts rained down, missing by inches as the wreckage shielded them. 30 seconds to jump, Cathera called. James ducked the ship beneath a crumbling dreadnought, sending shards of rusted metal spiraling behind them. "We are either geniuses or complete idiots." "Possibly both," Cathera admitted. A Zorith warship tried to follow, but clipped a massive chunk of wreckage. The collision sent it spinning out of control, crashing into a derelict cruiser in a fiery explosion. James whooped. "Okay, I take it back. That was beautiful." Cathera's gaze locked onto the jump display. 10 seconds. A final plasma torpedo locked onto them. James's expression hardened. "Not today." He jerked the ship sideways, forcing the missile to slam into a floating battleship instead. The resulting explosion sent a shockwave through the entire field, blinding their pursuers. The nav computer beeped. Cathera's voice was steady. "Jumping now." James hit the switch, and the universe vanished into streaks of light. Drifting in the void, the ship lurched violently out of hyperspace, tumbling into an unknown sector. Sparks flew from the control panel. Smoke filled the cockpit. James let out a ragged breath. "Are we dead?" Cathera checked the sensors. Not yet. James exhaled. Great. Love that for us. She turned to him. Where are we? James blinked at the screen, then frowned. I have no idea. Cathera's gaze narrowed. You set the jump coordinates blindly. He grinned weakly. Would you rather have died? She considered this. No. Then you're welcome. The cockpit fell into silence. For the first time since this started, they were safe. For the first time, Cathera was truly free. She leaned back, staring out at the unknown stars. James glanced at her. So, what now? She was silent for a long time. Then she spoke. We start over. James arched a brow. You sure about that? Cathera exhaled. Yes. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't following orders. She was choosing her own path. As they drifted into the unknown, neither of them noticed the distress signal blinking faintly on their dashboard. Someone, or something, had just picked up their escape. And they weren't alone. A warrior's choice. The silence of space was deceiving. Cathera sat in the co-pilot's seat, her sharp gaze locked on the blinking signal on the control panel. It was faint, distorted, but undeniably real. They weren't alone. James let out a slow breath beside her, rubbing the exhaustion from his face. All right. I'll bite. He pointed at the screen. Is that good news, or we're about to die news? Cathera didn't answer immediately. She had spent her entire life following orders, knowing exactly what came next. Now, everything was uncertain. She tapped the console, decoding the signal. It was a distress beacon. Not Zoreth, not human, but something old. Something that had been out here long before either of their species had even set foot in this sector. She exhaled. Unknown. James groaned. Cool. That's usually when things explode. Cathera turned to him. We do not have the fuel to run. We must investigate. James gave a tired laugh. Of course we must. Because what else was there? They had burned every bridge, defied every expectation. They had no home, no backup, no plan. Just each other. A signal in the dark. The ship drifted closer to the source of the distress beacon. Cathera felt something she hadn't in a long time. Curiosity. James, on the other hand, looked nervous. I've seen too many horror vids to know this is a bad idea. Cathera smirked slightly. Then stay aboard. James scoffed. Like hell, I'm letting you check it out alone. That was unexpected. He didn't hesitate, didn't consider leaving her behind. He had no reason to stay with her anymore. And yet he did. A lost warship. The source of the beacon was a derelict warship, drifting among shattered asteroids. It was ancient. The hull was scarred, burned, with deep gashes from long-forgotten battles. Strange symbols marked the exterior, written in a language neither of them recognized. Cathera scanned it carefully. It is not of Zoreth origin. James frowned. Not human either. He adjusted the scanner, then went still. Huh. Cathera glanced at him. What? James tapped the display. This ship is hundreds of years old. She raised a brow. Yet it still sends a distress signal. James exhaled. Okay. Now I'm really regretting this. Cathera ignored him and docked the shuttle. The airlock hissed open. Cold, stale air seeped into their ship. Beyond the threshold, the ghost of an old war awaited. The final lesson. Inside, the ship was a tomb. Flickering lights cast eerie shadows over silent hallways, where armored figures lay frozen in time. Some still clutched weapons, others slumped against walls, their battles lost centuries ago. James muttered, I take back every complaint. This is officially the creepiest thing I've ever done. Cathera moved ahead, scanning the walls. She touched the strange markings carved into the metal. This was a warrior vessel. James arched a brow. Like yours? She shook her head. No, these warriors fought for something more. James frowned. More than war. Cathera didn't respond. But she felt it. The remnants of something ancient, something different. Then she saw it. A recording device, still barely functional, blinking weakly under layers of dust. She activated it. A grainy hologram flickered to life. A warrior stood there, tall, imposing, armored in battle-worn steel. His voice crackled through the silence, speaking words in an unknown tongue. Cathera listened carefully. Then the universal translator caught just enough to form a broken translation. War does not make us strong. Choice does. The message repeated, before the device died forever. Cathera stood frozen. James blinked. That felt a little personal. She said nothing. Because, for the first time, she understood. Her entire life had been a lie. Strength was not obedience. Honor was not blind loyalty. She was not weak for leaving. She was stronger than those who stayed. The road ahead. Cathera turned to James. We leave. He hesitated. That's it? No exploring, no looting ancient warrior tech. She shook her head. James studied her, then sighed. All right, but I hope you know this was a top-tier creepy experience. She smirked. You survived. He grinned. Yeah, thanks to you. That warmth stirred inside her again. Unfamiliar, but no longer unwanted. As they boarded their shuttle and left the ancient wreckage behind, James leaned back in his seat. So, any idea where we go now? Cathera glanced at the empty star map in front of them. For the first time, there was no mission, no commander, no orders. Just the endless possibility of the unknown. She exhaled slowly. We go where we choose. James smiled. I like the sound of that. She did too. For the first time, Cathera was free. And this was just the beginning. As they vanished into hyperspace, a single blinking signal remained on the ancient warship, a silent watcher, waiting, and it had just marked their presence.